All right, well, very cool. Now, speaking of exciting films, I have a weird relationship with Prince of Tides where it's one of those movies you hear about all the time, but it's somehow evaded me. So I have very little knowledge of anything about it except that there might be a therapist in it somewhere. And I know a lot about movies, and it's one of those weird ones that you always hear about, but somehow has evaded me. So it's kind of like this weird dark spot in my movie knowledge.
You gotta see it.
Oh, no.
It is in my top 3 of my favorite films of all times.
Wow.
It is my favorite dramatic film in terms of the characters and the story. There's nothing like it for me. I think it's really a great film. And
okay,
I was going to show... I looked around, I was going to show the scene. There is a traumatic event that happens to the main character. Instead, I was going to do a pretty normal scene. It's the scene that's called Dad Gets Dog Food. And what I really like about it is because it really signifies how they are dealing with flashbacks. Most of the actual story is being told in flashbacks, and that can be really hard for the audience to go through. You're never really there. It feels like you're always like jumping back in time, and then you're in the present again, and this back and forth where it pulls you out of the movie. But I think they did it perfectly. It didn't hurt them at all. The film was nominated for several Academy Awards, and I want to say that Barbra Streisand won for directing. She directed this one. Definitely nominated.
Huh.
It stars Nick Nolte and Barbra Streisand. It's a 1991 American romantic drama film based on the novel of the same name by Pat Conroy. It's a story of the narrator's struggle to overcome the psychological damage inflicted by his dysfunctional childhood in South Carolina. The film was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, but lost the award to Silence of the Lambs. And I have to say, Nick Nolte's performance, he's the main character in it, is just great. He plays like a football coach from South Carolina, the way he talks, the accent, and then he finds himself in New York City with a shrink, which is played by Barbra Streisand, and he did an amazing job. So I picked this scene because I thought it might be a nice way to talk about flashbacks. So because the main character is from South Carolina and his dad was a fisherman, he has this relationship with food, especially seafood. And he picked up some shrimps from the farmer's market in New York. As he's preparing the food, he's remembering the times at home. So I thought, since you haven't seen the film, I'm going to walk you through it, but feel free to jump in. In 3, 2... So we're at the farmer's market. He's picking up some shrimps, and we're cutting straight to him in the kitchen. And this is the first time where we hear the flashback.
Shrimp Newburn. For Christ's sake, Lila, it's got wine in it. And butter.
It's elegant food, Henry. And it's going to get me into the Carleton League.
And his dad is refusing this new cuisine that Mom is trying. She wants to be with the fine people.
Why do you want to join anyway, Mama, if they don't want you?
Of course they want me. They just don't know it yet.
You see, even the dog won't eat it.
Dad, who's like this rambunctious, abusive dude, is not happy.
I think it's good.
Who asked you?
Nobody.
This is where we meet young Tom. We realize he's kind of like a sensitive boy. He starts crying when
What did I tell you about crying in this house?
Dad is messing with him.
Sit up straight. Come on, sit up straight. You gonna cry now?
This is his sister, and they're twins. And the reason why he is in New York is actually because of his sister, who tried to commit suicide, and he's now trying to help the shrink figure out what happened. And
I'm in.
we're still in the flashback, and this is Luke. He's the big brother, and he's the only one that can stand up to Dad. And this is intercut with present time Tom smashing the knife on the garlic, and we're back in it, into the flashback. And so Mom decides she's going to do just regular cooking, put some onions on the pan, and then puts a portion of dog food with it. Because she has nothing else in the kitchen, because she spent all her money on the fine cuisine. Intercut with present time Tom.
Your mouth is hanging open, child. Nice and spicy.
Nice.
And I like this back and forth here quite a bit. She serves the food as he's saying, I want some American decent food.
Now this is food, Lila.
And the dog's all jealous.
Get up, children.
And then we're back in the
Wow.
shrink office. I was going to say, so we're now out of the kitchen in present time, and we jumped the story into the shrink office, where we find out that Tom just told that whole memory to Barbara Streisand, the shrink, to help figure out what's wrong with his sister.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're going to talk about. Like that time jumping is really cool, and this example of kind of merging past and present, where you actually end up at one point. I didn't distinguish that the shrimp was in the present. I thought that was something the mom was doing on the side. I guess I didn't really follow the scene because of the overlap.
Right.
But I do still kind of lose sense of what's past and what's present, and I don't necessarily know that is not the intention, to kind of have that blending happen as the tension rises, and then to leap out of it to Streisand and
Yep.
in the therapist office and get to relax.
I'd like to point out a couple of things. Usually the shots in New York, the present, is a little bit on the blue side, but when he's in the kitchen, it warms up quite a bit. We're more on the orange side of it. As he's like taking his shirt off and the heat is coming through, it takes us into the past. It takes us to, where are we, South Carolina, where this is all taking place. Cinematography is also playing a part here, as well as the parallel action in terms of the editing. So you have the sound come in before we cut into the flashback. That sort of leads us down that path. And then once we're in the past, it's visually quite warm, more orange, and then just a little teal in the wardrobe. And that's sort of that
Right.
balance between teal and orange. I don't know, Tyler, you probably know about this, that's a very pleasing combination in terms of two colors that complement each other.
Is this a jab at me for being from Colorado with the Broncos?
No, I don't know. Do they have that?
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. But like a lot of high concept action hero movies, Terminator, Batman, they play with these colors quite a bit, and then usually it's very heavy on the blue with these islands of orange in there. And here it's a bit the opposite. It's like majority orange and then a little teal here and there in the wardrobe or in the window, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, hearing you say that, I have my immediate reaction is both are very warm, both scenes are very warm, but the flashback is absolutely boiling with that teal orange tint. And he's the only thing in the scenes of him cooking in the present that's teal and orange. So it's almost like he's this radiated figure just carrying around these memories of what he's remembering of this very orange experience.
That's
I don't know
good.
if that kind of meshes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, for the most part, he is the orange dude in a blue environment. But in that one shot where we transition into the flashback, clearly the wall blends with him. Like, he's already there, is what that tells me. And
Gotcha.
him
What
taking
time
off the
code's that at?
shirt, it just feels like now we are not in New York anymore. He's already gone.
Right. Not only is he cooking food, he's physically on fire
Yeah. And
emotionally.
And this whole scene basically shows the dynamics between that family. So there's all these different bonds, relationship between dad and our main character Tom, relationship between the older brother, relationship between Savannah and Tom, the two twins, that they are sort of really close friends, and they're like these children, innocent children that are just stuck in this dysfunctional relationship and don't know what to do. They're helpless. And mom doesn't quite pay attention because she's up in her own world. Like I said, she wants to be with the rich people and she doesn't really understand what's going on. And Luke is the only
Right.
one that stands up to dad. And it's really nice set up, and it's not the one scene that defines this whole relationship, but it's a reoccurring theme throughout. We've seen several flashbacks up to this point where we understand who everybody is, and it's important to know so that we're ready for what's coming.
Yeah, it's very cool. I think it's a really fascinating use of flashback that's also very subtle. You know, it doesn't seem like a standout, jump out scene, but
Yeah.
just
And-
playing with that idea of imagery and memories and just kind of reliving this stuff while going through therapy, that time jump is a big deal.
Yeah. And I mean, this was in the early 90s, so almost 20 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And nowadays, like when I'm cutting flashbacks, I'm moving actually much faster, I would say. I really use flashbacks as thoughts. So I don't linger that much. It doesn't feel like a scene in itself. It's more like it's these quick moments, these quick flashes of a memory. Like I cut a film a couple of years ago called The End of Love, and the main character has some flashes of his wife that died in a car accident, and they're really just like these fractions of a second, at least that's what it feels like, that are coming to him, and it immediately, like, it just jars him and just hits him. And it's very powerful, very effective.
It's an incredibly powerful tool to have as an editor, and it leads me to ask you the important question we always get to, which is how much of the design of this scene, Sven, do you think happened in editing versus in the writing stage? I mean, there's always versions of this thing where, you know, they wrote a movie that was completely different. There were no flashbacks, had a mess on their hands, and then saved it, which I really doubt's the case. That's one extreme. And the other extreme is that it's incredibly detailed, like, say, the recent split screen scene in one of the latest episodes of Better Call Saul, where you know that's all meticulously detailed in the writing process, although it's a very camera technique heavy, editing technique heavy execution. Where do you think this falls in that spectrum?
I think I've read the screenplay, so I know that these flashbacks are written into the script at those moments.
Right.
I don't know if it's in the book. I assume it's very similar in the book. What I think is you have this implied, or you have this idea brought up in the writing, and then when you actually shooting the scenes and you're cutting it in the editing, you play with it. And it could be that you expand upon it, like you cut back and forth way more, or you pull back on it. Just once you've defined the film in the editing, you really try to figure out how much flashbacks can you handle before the audience is going to lose it, or how much do they need to be fully engaged. And I remember that when I did the video on Dunkirk, I saw a couple of interviews with Christopher Nolan and Lee Smith, the editor, and they spoke about how they cut like 10 different versions of how much they go back and forth to, and it's not flashbacks, this is a parallel action, to figure out when is it too much for the audience. And they really cut a version and then they screened it and just felt it and then went back, tried a different approach. And so I'm pretty sure the way it's happened is they planned this, and then in the editing they refined it to the point where maybe they added it to other scenes, or they went much bigger than they originally intended. All that stuff you really only can fully execute in the editing.
Yes, that's exactly right. And you find all these opportunities, things you didn't imagine, like, oh, we can just cut quickly to the shrimp here. Maybe they're planning to escalate it in a different way. So I feel like as an editor, this is kind of a gold mine of a scene. And yet it's a fairly restrained, considering how crazy they could have gone with it, it's a very restrained, effective version of that, where the flashbacks don't feel invasive or showy. It just feels right.
Yeah, exactly. Let's look at some details to really show that it's not just arbitrary back and forth between these scenes. So, for example, there's a lot of intercutting between the frying pans from the present time and the past as she's preparing the food, and he's scooping up the shrimps, and she does the same thing with the onions. They're fighting, we're cutting to the kitchen. So he's chopping up garlic, and then little Tom is cutting onions. So it's similar action right there. And then somebody's scooping up the onions. I'm not sure whose hands those are yet. It's probably hers. And then we cut back to the dog food being put into the pan.
Right. Yeah.
And then this is great. So, and then on 1:49:48, little Tom is putting pepper or spices on top of the onions in the frying pan. And we intercut that as present-time Tom is putting salt on top of the shrimps.
It's a good, plain American meal.
So these little things, this parallel action creates meaning. It's like we're making a connection between the present and the past.
Now this is food, Lila.
And that helps to not pull us out of a scene. It's a continuous narrative arc. And I love the fact that when the scene ends, we don't cut back to Tom in his home eating the food, which would be kind of a fizzle of the scene. No, I'm sure they shot that, but they decided we're just going to propel the scene forward by cutting now to the office as he's finishing that story that he just remembered and now shares with her. This is probably a story that he hadn't really thought about in many, many years. It's now coming up because he has to deal with this. And it's really just foreshadowing what else he's going to remember.
Yeah, it's a very cool scene.
For me, top 3 films of all times. If you haven't seen it, highly, highly recommend it. Try not to hear what it's about, what happens. Just let it happen.